Hello everyone. So Ubers, of course, as we all know, are pretty much the most powerful thing in TF2 in really any format, casually, competitively, etc. And today I want to talk about something related to Ubers, especially how to make them more effective because, of course, you know, a primary thing to look at as far as team success is going to be how effective are their Ubers. And there are, well, let's first introduce the kind of idea of the stages of an Uber, because they are, of course, all very important towards making Ubers as successful as possible. And this is pretty simple. You have whatever happens before the Uber, and I think I have an entire video about that. It might be on the second channel, but basically, you know, to summarize, you want to be looking at your spotting, identify what the hold looks like if you can afford to. You want to be actually moving towards a position to take your Uber before you actually have the Uber, as a way to kind of artificially extend the ad rather than wait until you have, at which point you're basically already on the clock for when things are about to start evening out. Because of course, you know, if it's, you know, 50 ad, then it will stay 50 ad indefinitely until you actually get that Uber, and then it starts ticking down to 40, 30, close to evening, right? So actually moving before you get is an important way to kind of extend that ad. And yeah, actually, like, you know, those steps that you take in order to decide where you Uber, and, you know, the actual things that happen before right-clicking. Yeah, and part of that is, you know, selecting a door and an area you want to go. All those things are important, and those are the kind of pre-Uber stuff. Yeah, of course, you know, warrants its own video, which I have made. Now, of course, the next stage, which is the one that everyone pretty much focuses on, is the actual Uber itself. What happens when you are invincible? And of course, that's really important because, you know, any kills that you get, any, you know, taking out a sentry gun on last or something like that, being able to like kill the other medic, all these important things tend to happen during the Uber. At least that's where you are at your most powerful. So as a result, you can get a lot done during the Uber, and when people think of how to improve their Ubers, a lot of the time they look at what's going on during the literal Uber itself. And some people stop there, which is pretty bad in my opinion, because there is a more, arguably more important stage of the Uber, which is the post-Uber. Meaning, what is the state of the game the second that your Uber is done? Because, oh, did my game just... No, we're good. I don't know why that tabbed out. Because, as I've already talked about, you know, you are at your most powerful during the Uber. And, you know, arguably in the pre-Uber, like, players are buffed and people are healthy, ready to take their Uber. But in the post-Uber, you are at your most vulnerable. Because, you know, even if you get a bunch of kills, or even if you get a lot of damage, etc., you still are, you are no longer invincible. You are potentially in a, oh, I just forced it. That's funny. You are potentially in a very, very precarious situation, because the second that your Uber ends, you can just explode instantly. And it doesn't matter if you are a full buff demo or a buffed scout or any of these classes. If you're ending in front of 3 players, all of them can just do 100 damage to you and you instantly die. Now, of course, it isn't always so simple as the Uber ends and you have a bad post-Uber positioning and you literally die the second that you're unflashed. But there are so many times that I will see teams, including invite teams, will take good Ubers, get good value out of the Uber, and just take a bad post-Uber fight and lose the fight. It happens way too much. And a lot of that is communication, but also a lot of it's just playing for the post, right? Because a consistent way to take Ubers is not to try to just wipe the team or win the round by the time that Uber fades. And when I say win the round, I don't mean literally have the point capped, but just get so many picks that nothing else even matters anymore, and it's basically impossible to lose at that point. Although, still some situations like that do end up being losable. No, it's more consistent to take your Uber with the post in mind, get what you can during the Uber, but at some point during the Uber, at least take into account that, okay, well, it takes us some time to get to this positioning that we want to be at, and we want to do that during the Uber. We don't want to be super vulnerable out of position before getting to the strong and safe positioning from which we can take a strong post-Uber fight. No, we want to get there by the time our Uber fades. So, yeah, it's critically important. And this applies not just to Ubers into last, although I will talk about those. It applies to exchanges as well. So I suppose we can start off with exchanges. So of course I also have an entire dedicated video to exchanges, believe it or not. And post-Ubers are probably the most emphasized in an exchange situation, because when you're given a scenario like that where both teams have an Uber and both teams are using an Uber, you know, with at least some overlap, otherwise it wouldn't really be an exchange. Really the only advantage that you have coming out of that is whichever team uses their Uber, or excuse me, not necessarily whichever team uses their Uber later, because of course flashes and all the things can make Ubers different durations. No, it is whichever team's Uber ends later, because of course then there's a window of time in which you are vulnerable. So that is a major consideration or a potential advantage for a team. But also, any picks or anything going into that post are going to be really useful. Positioning as well. So in an exchange, having a good post-Uber positioning is really important. Getting kills during the exchange is really good, not just because kills are good, but because it makes your post-Uber fight good. So that's something to consider going into exchanges, right? But in general, like, you get hard punished for poor post-Uber positioning during an exchange. If you are overly aggressive and position somewhere that you really shouldn't when that Uber fades, your team will just wipe. Like, often. It is not uncommon whatsoever for teams to full wipe after a bad exchange, where the exchange itself maybe was totally fine, but you just stayed in a little too long, your Uber faded, and you weren't out of the door or something like that, and you just lose everyone. It happens, and the only thing you have to think about to fix that is consider the post. If your exchange is not so much better that you can force the other team out of the point, assuming that you're like trying to push the point with it or to attack with it. If you're defending, it's usually pretty easy. You can kind of just hold your ground, and generally speaking, unless you don't lose any players, you should be able to kind of stay in. But even then, if you're defending, you still might need to concede a little bit of space to potentially refight with. You don't just want to be like in their models when your Uber is fading. But point being, unless your offensive exchange rather, is so much better that the other team is just forced to leave, which is less common, then you're gonna have to back up. You're potentially just gonna have to leave the point entirely and refight off of, you know, whatever picks you got or anything that of value that you got during the Uber. And if you didn't get anything of value during the Uber, then it might just not materialize into any strong advantage for you, and you might just need to chill out. But point being, you still need to back up for the post. You don't want to be in a very vulnerable position where you're getting punished. That's quite important. And it is particularly pronounced in exchanges. And I should mention quickly, exchanges into last as well. Some teams will try to stay in during an last exchange, and it is so insanely rare for a last exchange to go so well that you can just stay in. Almost every single time, even if you get picks, even if you get the gun after, even if all these things go great, you still very often will have to leave and leave the doors, re-enter lobby. And from there, when you have the picks and, you know, maybe you're playing a battalion's backup or something, when you have that advantage you want to re-push off of, then absolutely you re-push, you get through the doors. Then you take your post-Uber fight into last. But at the actual time the Uber's ending, you want to be safe. You want to make sure that you're not caught in the doorways. Because that's a common thing during exchanges is, you know, the exchange seems okay for one team, maybe a little bit better, and instead of backing up and like being ready to back out of the door and potentially refight later or just play safe positioning to re-pressure from, instead they stay in just a little bit too long and suddenly, okay, now there's a demo catching you in the door and you are dead. So yeah, that post-Uber positioning, very, very important. So yeah, and that's with regards to exchanges. Now in last pushes as well, equally important. And even with last pushes I think post-Uber positioning is less thought about than exchanges, because, you know, when you take an exchange that's okay but not good enough for you to stay in, and then you stay in and then wipe, it seems very obvious, like, okay, we just, like, we're out of position there, too forward, when the Uber ended. But a lot of last fights, people kind of get caught in the weeds because, of course, you have ad. They don't have an Uber to use, meaning you can take as much positioning you want with that Uber. And a lot of teams like to do that. Of course, you know, as I talk about when I talk about pushing last, your Uber can either cross to the other side of the point, or other side of the last, or it can stay on the side that it used in on. And it's usually preferable to cross with an Uber because you get to sweep more area, you get to bring your flank in sooner. I remember I beefed on this guy. My med lives though, fortunately. Yeah, you get to just sweep more area, potentially catch more picks, bring your flank in sooner. It's generally preferable, but there is always the big caveat that you need to have enough time. And you need to have enough time remaining in the Uber to make sure you can actually secure that positioning on the other side by the time your Uber fades. Because you do not want to be in a situation in which you try to cross and your Uber fades as you're midway through crossing and suddenly you're in the middle of no man's land. You will watch games be played where a team tries to push into last with ad and they get exactly what they want out of the Uber. They get a gun down, they maybe get a pick, everyone gets through the door cleanly, but the Uber ends in the middle of nowhere. If it's on Snakewater, it ends like in the middle low ground. On Gully Wash, they give up top right and fall down to try and instantly play the point. On Process, they're just stuck in the pit in front of point trying to shoot both sides. No, you need to be on a side where you can actually, you don't just get flanked from everywhere, where you actually get to take a proper fight. You can lock down a spawn shutter and you can get everyone healthy, and then from there you can bomb, recommit, play the point, do any of the things that you want to be doing, but you need to start with good positioning from which you can stage a proper fight. And that is something that teams mess up so often, is just poor post-Uber positioning. And that's where communication kind of comes in. Is basically every time that I'll ever take an Uber into last with ad, every single time, I of course am calling to my pocket scout any relevant targets that I'd want to focus, if anyone's caught, anything to that effect. But when it comes time to either cross or stay, I'm communicating to my combo what I want to do based on, you know, if I think that I can cross, because I'm usually the slowest class, i.e., you know, the biggest limiting factor in whether we can cross or not. And even after that call, I'm communicating to my team what side we're ending on, if we're ending on left or right. And yeah, I think with literally every single last and every single last push ever, you want to be ending on a side. You can get away with ending centrally in some poor positioning, but that's the thing. You're getting away with it, and it doesn't really benefit you at all. Sure, there's something to be said about, like, maybe you leave a demo to, you know, watch one shutter as you cross so that your combo's on the other shutter, and then everyone should be locked in spawn. Like, sure, there's things you can do that don't involve stacking every single player on one side or the other, but a side is better positioning, and that's what you want to be looking for in these post-Ubers. Because, again, you are at your most vulnerable when that Uber ends, and you just want to be in a strong position from which you can stage a good fight. Is there anything else with regards to post-Ubers I want to talk about? That might be it, I think. Yeah. So, when talking about Ubers and, you know, as a team, when you're talking about things that may have gone wrong and things that you might want to improve, really think about the post, because the post is the most important part of the Uber in many respects. And even Ubers that are successful end up failing because a team takes poor post-Uber positioning. And in many cases, Ubers that are not really that great or don't really achieve much can still be salvaged off of a good post-Uber fight. And one thing as well that I should mention is playing for the post. So if you are, for example, like a flank member in the case of pushing into last, or a soldier in the case of an exchange, or a demo in the case of an exchange, during the actual Ubers themselves, unless you're really involved actively in the Uber, you don't want to be dying, of course, because if you die, then your post is going to be worse. You're going to be down a player. But you want to be staying healthy and staying reloaded for the post. So as a demo, if my scout is taking an exchange, I want to be far enough away that I'm not demanding any flashes, and our Uber can be as long as possible. I want to be far enough away that I'm not a primary target, but I want to be close enough that I can get flashed if I need to. So I have a safety net there, and that maybe I could even play close enough that, you know, the other team's scouter or whoever's taking the exchange thinks that they can kill me, but I'm actually far enough away that them doing so is overcommitting and kind of like bait them into that poor positioning for the post, right? Something like that. But also, critically, I want to stay topped off on ammo is a big deal. So, yeah. You know, just playing for that post. As a soldier, if you're weak, be grabbing a pack. Don't be actively taking fights during that Uber when you want to be thinking about that post. Because healthy soldiers bombing in a post is what's going to be punishing that that poor positioning from the other team if they have poor post-Uber positioning. And even if you aren't punishing bad positioning, still, soldier bombs in the post-Uber are really useful for just a general post-Uber dry fight, right? So, yeah. Just as all the classes not directly involved in the Uber, playing your health and playing your ammo so that you're effective in the post is really important. Because an Uber is only a max of 8 seconds, right? But fights in TF2 sometimes are much shorter than that, but most of the time are longer than that. And you want to be preparing yourself and, you know, making sure you're as effective as possible for the most important game state afterwards. The actual decisive fight of that post-Uber. So I don't know if there's anything else I have to talk about with regards to post-Ubers. Yeah, just think of Ubers in terms of the post. Don't worry too... Like, of course, if a gun doesn't go down in a last push or something like that, then you can start thinking about... that sticky could have been way better. Then you can start thinking about... what's it called? Yeah, what went wrong during the Uber. But as long as your Uber is actually getting good positioning, and in the case of like a push into last, getting good positioning, and that's really all. Like getting a gun, getting positioning, any picks is wonderful, of course. As long as you're getting that stuff, really think about that post, because that is where a lot of mistakes are made, and you do not, under any circumstances, want to be stuck in no man's land just because you feel like you can fight everything and shoot everything because you're kind of in between both spawns, but in reality, you're kind of less effective at either, and you are extremely vulnerable. So anyway, that's all I have to talk about post-Ubers, and yeah, very important topic. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time.